So these are the videos for Chapter 7. We're starting with Section 1. And we're going to discuss the executive branch, which is the branch that the president heads up in this chapter. So the president heads up the executive branch of the U.S. government. Because of the power and influence, the president is one of the most powerful people in the world. And, of course, the first president was George Washington. So you need to make sure that you know that. The first president was George Washington. And it is being a very important role. Now, our branches are three equal branches, so the president really doesn't have all authority. But at the same time, they are very influential, being a single-headed branch. Here's the qualifications to run for president. You got to be at least 35. I'll be 35 next year, so Mr. Taylor, 2024. I'll be 35, well, actually, this year. I don't know how old I am. I'll be 35 in May, so I would qualify at that point. You must be a native-born U.S. citizen, and you must be a resident of the United States for 14 years. So you got to live here for 14 years and be born in the United States. You say, well, that contradicts each other. But it doesn't really, because what it's saying is you've got to be a native-born citizen, a born U.S. citizen, but you can move out of the country and not be disqualified. So, like, when someone was 25, they decided they wanted to go live in Spain for 5 years. So at that point, they're 30. They move back to the United States. When they're 45, they want to run for president. They could, even though they lived in Spain for 5 years, because they are a natural-born citizen and they've been living in the United States for 14 years at the time of the election. And so that's the qualifications to run for president. Just a few things of recent diversity. John F. Kennedy became the first Catholic president in 1960, and it don't sound like that big of a deal now, but at the time it was a really big deal that there was a Catholic president. In 1984, the Democrat Party nominated Geraldine Ferraro as the first female vice presidential nominee. She didn't win, but she was the first female vice presidential nominee that was nominated. In 1988, Jesse Jackson ran a close second for the Democrat nominee for president. So Jesse Jackson in 88 almost won the nomination for the Democratic candidate. In 2008, Barack Obama did become the first African-American president, winning in 2008. In 2016, the Democrat Party nominated Hillary Clinton to become the first female nominee for president. Of course, she didn't win, but she was the first female that was a major party candidate that was a female. In 2020, the Democrat Kamala Harris became the first female African-American and Indian-American vice president. She is our current vice president, and her heritage goes back to African-American and Indian-American from like the Asian Indian, not Native American. And so that's where she has her heritage goes back to. Presidential elections take place every 4 years. The Constitution does not have set up to elect the president by direct popular vote. What it means is we use the Electoral College, and I've mentioned that a few times so far this year. I'll mention it again in Chapter 10, but it's an indirect method to elect the president. And what this is that the Constitution states that we shall appoint electors, or people who elect the president. So even though the ballot has the name of the presidential candidate, you're actually voting for an elector that's pledged that nominee. It's a very confusing process. Basically, if I was a presidential candidate and John was the delegate or the elector, then when you vote for me, you're voting for John to go cast a vote for me. And so remember we talked about the whole thing with representation, and we have 9 electoral votes, 7 representing the members of the House of Representatives, 2 representing the Senate. That means we get 9 votes. So the state of Alabama only gets 9 votes. We vote for the 9 votes that are going to be cast. And so that's how it works. It's confusing, but that's how it works. Each state has as many votes as members of the House of Representatives and Senate for that state. Again, we've got 9 because we've got 7 members of the House and 2 senators. California has 55 because they got 53 members of the House and 2 senators. This is what a ballot looks like. You got to vote for president. You got to circle in. For example, you want to vote for Donald Trump there, vote for Hillary Clinton there. This is from the 2016 election. Jill Stein, who it is, you just fill it in. And it's for president and vice president. They're both on the same little area. And there's also a section called the write-in section here at the bottom where you can write in a president and a vice presidential candidate and fill that in. They're probably not going to win, but you can write it in anyway. Here's another example of an election. This is more of a state election. And so this is for districts. This is for Rick Scott and Charlie Crist, Commissioner of Agriculture. You just kind of vote on who you want. And then there's also District Court of Appeals. There's an amendment. This is an amendment. This is just asking if Judge Chris Altenberg stay in office and if Judge Morris Silverman would stay in office. And so you just kind of fill in all those, then you feed it through a machine, and it counts the vote. This is the election of the 2016 election. I still haven't updated it for the 2020 just because the numbers are still kind of skewed different places. I'll probably update it for next year. But this shows you the 2016 election, and it shows you that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. She won 47.6% of the vote. Donald Trump won 47.5%. Where he won was here with the electoral map. He got the number 270 of votes, which is a little bit more than half of the amount of votes cast. And so that won him the election. You see the red states are the ones that voted for Donald Trump, the blue states for Hillary Clinton. And then like Maine up here is not a winner-take-all state. So their votes are given to different candidates. Like for example, you see at the bottom, Maine, 3 votes went to Hillary Clinton, 1 went to Donald Trump. Nebraska is also not a winner-take-all state, but all 5 of theirs went to Donald Trump, so it didn't really matter. The Electoral College has 538 electors. There are 100 senators, 2 from each state, 435 members of the House, and Washington, D.C. has 3 electoral votes. Again, here's some of that math coming in. This is how we come up with that 270 number. You have 435 members of the House of Representatives. You have 100 senators, 2 from each state, and Washington, D.C. gets 3 votes just for being Washington, D.C. That brings the number to 538. You divide it by half, and the majority of that is 270. That's why the person who gets 270 wins the election. States with a larger population gets more electoral votes because the House of Representatives is based on the population count. Usually, if a candidate barely wins a state, they still get all the electoral votes. This is in the winner-take-all states, like what Alabama is. Swing states get most of the attention on election day. Some of these are Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida. A swing state is just a state that really doesn't go one way or the other. Sometimes they may vote Republican, sometimes they vote Democrat. Most states have something they typically usually vote. Alabama, for example, usually votes Republican. California usually votes Democrat. Some states like Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida don't vote one way every time. Sometimes they vote Republican, sometimes Democrat. To be elected president, you must get 270 of the 530 electoral votes. And although the winning presidential candidate is usually announced that night, it doesn't officially happen until December when the electors meet. There's a day in December they come together, they meet, and they cast their votes. And then in January, Congress counts the electoral votes and officially makes it, announces the next president. That's what happened on January 6th this year, where the Capitol was stormed. They was in the process of counting the votes at that time. Presidents serve 4-year terms. We have a limit now of 2 terms or 10 years, and we'll get that here in just a minute. George Washington served 8 years but refused to serve another term, and other presidents followed in this example. But FDR, who went up serving for 4 terms, this changed because of him, but the 22nd Amendment limited it to 2 terms or 10 years. So you can serve, like say if you was vice president and you had to take over for the president 2 years into their term, then you can serve those last 2 years and 2 terms of your own, or your 2 terms that are 8 years. The president receives a salary of $400,000 a year plus money for expenses and travel. You also have a private movie theater, a small gym, a bowling alley, a heated pool. You have Camp David, which is a mountainous state 60 miles north of Washington, D.C., and you also get special perks such as special cars and the use of Air Force One. The vice president is elected with the president. You can't really separate them. They're elected together. The qualifications for vice president are the same as the president, just in case this person winds up becoming president. The qualifications have to be the same. Vice presidents do not attract the same attention, but if something happens to the president, they can't rule it, or not rule, but if they can't lead anymore, like if they're mentally, they have some kind of, where they're, they get dementia or something where they aren't mentally able to focus on the job, or something happens and they pass away or whatever, then the vice president takes over. 8 presidents have died while in office. The Constitution has it worded in a way that if the president dies, the vice president takes on powers and duties as the president. But early Americans didn't really know what this meant. They didn't know if it meant that they would become the president or still serve as vice president and just do the job of the president. In 1841, Vice President John Tyler changed this when William Henry Harrison died in office. He died like a month into office, and John Tyler took over the oath and became president. In 1947, they passed the Presidential Succession Act, which indicated a line of succession. If the president and vice president both die in office, the Speaker of the House becomes president. And this is the presidential succession: president, president, vice president, Speaker of the House, President Pro Tem of the Senate, Secretary of State. You can read these going all the way down to the Department of Homeland Security. Would have it at that point. The 25th Amendment made it official that the president or vice president dies, or that if the president dies, the vice president will take over as president. It also gives the vice president the power to determine if the president is not able to fulfill their duties. The 25th Amendment has only been used 3 times. In 1973, Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned, and Richard Nixon replaced him with Gerald Ford. The second time Nixon resigned, Ford became the president, and the third was when Ronald Reagan was going to have surgery. George H.W. Bush became president for about 8 hours while he was, he was unconscious or they was doing surgery. So he became president for 8 hours during that time. So it's a lot of info. I understand. If you have any questions, please email me. But this kind of discusses a little bit about the executive branch. We're going to get a little bit more into this in section 2.